So I'm Jo Bradshaw, and I'm the International Recruitment Manager at Working in New Zealand Health. We're based in Auckland, and we specialise in bringing healthcare professionals to New Zealand and provide a full service to help you with that. Working in New Zealand has actually been around for, 20 years now, and we've been helping bring professionals to New Zealand all that time. So we've got lots of experience in bringing professionals here. So you might have just noted a bit of an English accent. So yes, I am from the UK myself. I moved here actually 20 years ago, and I was born and raised in Blackpool in Lancashire. So I don't know if anybody there's from Lancashire, but give us a little raise of the hand if you're from that part of England. And so I moved here 20 years ago, and I live in Grey Lynn in Auckland, which I'm very fortunate to live there, and it's very close to our head office as well. Very happy in New Zealand. I've got a partner here, and I've got a 12-year-old son, and look, highly recommend living in New Zealand and the lifestyle. It's awesome. So much more relaxed than living in the UK, I have to say. So here with us today, we have got two panelists. So myself, I'll be doing some talking throughout on some topics, and then we've also got two of my colleagues. One of them is Naseem, and she's waving to you right now. Naseem is the head of our immigration team here at Working In. She's been, I feel like Naseem's been doing visa work forever. What she doesn't know is not worth knowing. So she's very experienced, and we have a team of licensed immigration advisors here to help you. She will be talking about the visa requirements on moving to New Zealand. We've also got Paul Goddard. Paul is over in the UK. But he also is equally experienced in the migration process. Paul lived in the UK for 17 years. Lived in New Zealand for 17 years and then moved back to the UK. He's an immigration and employment consultant, and again is very experienced in knowing everything you need to know and being very supportive in that process of moving. So you're in safe hands, basically. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about New Zealand and why New Zealand. So I'll just touch on this. And, you know, there's always been a huge interest from Brits and Irish to move to New Zealand and other parts of the world as well. And the main driver, and what people always tell me, because I've been doing this role for about 15 years now, is that New Zealand offers a better lifestyle. That is what is ultimately driving people to move. As you'll probably know, you know, New Zealand is a very similar landmass to the UK, but the population is only 5 million as compared to nearly 68 million, I think it is now. So you can notice there's a lot more space because it's so less populated, which means that driving around in New Zealand is much easier, getting to A to B. So less commute time, and giving you more time essentially with your partner or family or your friends, and definitely giving you that sort of more of a work-life balance. And also with New Zealand, you'll find that there's sort of access to beaches and mountains or amazing restaurants. Like the cuisine here is absolutely brilliant, and it's changed a lot since I moved here 20 years ago, and there's so many fabulous restaurants and amazing places to eat and great bars that would just compare to being in New York, for example, or London. So you've got everything that you need in New Zealand, and also, as we know, it is a relatively safe country to live in. And on top of all that now, of course, is that New Zealand is seen globally as a safe haven with our management of COVID. So, You know, currently there's no hospital cases or nobody in ICU in New Zealand. We've only got a few cases, a few current cases, which are basically in the isolation centres. So New Zealand is very much in a safe and from COVID environment. So what's that meant for us and for you is that it's a destination that's on even more people's radar. And so it is, yeah, it's sort of certainly top of the list for people globally now. And so that's, you know, one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar today was to really talk to you about how, as skilled healthcare workers, we can help you to move to New Zealand in this current environment. You know, you're very lucky. Healthcare workers are one of the professions that can move to New Zealand right now. And so what we're going to do today is talk you through some key topics as to how we're going to do that. So I'm just going to talk you through those topics. Sorry, just bear with me, that's right. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is just a quick update on what's going on with the New Zealand border. And then I'm going to be talking a little bit about the New Zealand healthcare industry and a view of the job market over here as it currently is. I will then hand over to Paul and he will talk to you about planning your journey to New Zealand. And then Nassim will talk about New Zealand visa requirements. Then we'll talk a little bit about the New Zealand registration process and then our expertise, basically how we can help you, and then where to from here. So hopefully that will cover up everything that will be of interest to you today. The other thing is, please feel free to post any of your questions in the chat room. We will try and answer some of the questions throughout, but don't worry if we don't get to them. We'll answer them after the webinar. The other thing is we are recording the webinar, so we can send you a copy of the webinar afterwards by email, and you'll get heaps of useful links in that email communication as well. So don't worry too much about trying to capture everything that we're talking about today. There's a lot to take in. So we are going to move on now to a border update. So lovely picture of an Air New Zealand plane there. Okay, so what's happening with the New Zealand border? Well, as I'm sure you're all aware, due to COVID, the border is currently closed. But despite this, the good news is that internationally qualified healthcare workers are still eligible for entry into New Zealand. There is an additional requirement here though, in that it is required that you submit an expression of interest to travel to New Zealand, and this is under the critical purpose exemption. That might all sound a little bit confusing, but don't worry. We found it straightforward now. It's been a lot of learning around this with it being a new thing, but we help with this. It's part of our visa service, because it's the first step in helping you gain entry in New Zealand. So we put together your border exemption, and that also includes a border exemption for any dependents, your partner or your children. We include them in the request as well. So I guess what I'll say at this point is don't put your plans on hold because the border's closed. Skilled healthcare workers are really, really lucky because you are covered by the exemption, so you can still apply to move to New Zealand. There's obviously a few things that you have to get in place first, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, but yeah, please don't put your plans on hold. Get started. It is taking longer at the moment, so the sooner you get started, the sooner you can be in New Zealand. The other thing I'll just slightly touch on is you'll obviously heard that there's a 2-week managed isolation when you arrive. Again, don't worry about any of that. Obviously, for most of you, it will be a bit of a way away. But we also provide you with the guidance on organising all that for you. So that's an update on the border. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight into that and gives you some confidence in continuing with your plans in moving to New Zealand. We would love to help you. So next, a little bit more of me before I hand you over to Paul. So what we're going to be talking about next is the New Zealand healthcare industry and a bit of an overview of the job market. So I'm sure this is something that you are all really, really keen to find out about. So firstly, what I will say is on the whole, again, as I'm sure you're probably aware, that there is a shortage of skilled healthcare workers in New Zealand. Some disciplines are more extensive than others, but on the whole, if you are a qualified healthcare professional and you've got some experience, then generally speaking, there is an opportunity for you here in New Zealand. Some of the roles that might be particularly in demand at the moment are for registered nurses in mental health and also in theatre. Those are 2 areas that are New Zealand's particularly struggling with at the moment. Midwives is another one, GPs, anaesthetic technicians, which I think is a global shortage of anaesthetic technicians, but we'd love to hear from you. Or I think you call them operating department practitioners in the UK. Physios, occupational therapists, sonographers, radiologists, psychologists, the list goes on. Let us know what your role is, and feel free to post in the chat room and let us know a bit about who you are and what you do. We'd love to know who's on the webinar. So with that, there's opportunities in both private and public healthcare in New Zealand, and those opportunities are nationwide, so right the way throughout New Zealand. What I will say though is when you're planning your journey to New Zealand and you're thinking about where you want to live, whether you've been to New Zealand already or whether you haven't, you might be thinking about where you want to live, and that means really thinking about, do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be more rural? Do you want to be close to a beach or a mountain? Are you into hiking? Where do you want to be? But it is advisable to be a little bit flexible on where you want to be. So maybe come up with a few regions or a few places in New Zealand that you'd be interested in. The more flexible you are, then the more opportunities you'll have in terms of us being able to secure your job. And generally speaking, with regards to gaining entry to New Zealand from a work perspective, you do need to get your New Zealand registration, and that's with the specific medical board relevant to your experience. And we'll talk some more about that later. But on the whole, you will be required to have the relevant qualification. You will be registered where you are right now, so in the country that you're residing, and have 2 years post being registered. And that then puts you in the best position to be able to get registration in New Zealand with the relevant board. And as I said, more about that a little bit later. I thought I'd just give you a couple of facts about the healthcare industry in New Zealand. I think, if you haven't been to New Zealand, it's sort of hard to understand, what's it like? What's the healthcare industry like? Well, I'll tell you that compared to the UK, we've got 220 public and private hospitals in New Zealand. And I know in the UK there is almost 2,000. So you can imagine, that's quite a big difference in terms of the number of hospitals. However, we are judged very, in terms of OECD countries, our healthcare system is seen to be of a very high standard. So with that in mind, it's a really good working environment for you. Modern equipment, a well-equipped environment. Basically, we rate really well on patient safety and also on timeliness and efficiency. But we're also considered, as the hospitals are also considered, very positive and friendly. So basically, great places to work all round. Also, the workforce is quite international. With a recent study that was done, basically we've got 42% of our total healthcare workforce as we're trained internationally. So that gives you a little bit of idea of what that's like. Now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about securing a job. I think it's really important to understand that when you're applying for a job overseas, it's not quite the same as applying for a job in the local market. Obviously, there's a lot of factors and aspects that you need to sort of have in place first. So we don't recommend that you go out and just start applying for jobs randomly online. And Paul will talk more about this shortly. What we do is we get you job ready, and by getting you job ready, that means that you're in the best position for us to represent you to put forward to a job. As you can imagine, a lot of the vacancies that you will see advertised, they require immediate start dates, or at least in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks. So my role and the recruitment team's role here in New Zealand is to really, with our healthcare network, is to understand where the opportunities are, where the need is for skills from overseas, and also to have an understanding of those roles where there's flexibility in start date as well, because of course it's going to take some time by the time you've even secured your job to get the visa. So it's really important that you've got all your preparation, and as I said, Paul will talk more about this in terms of being job ready, so that we can give you the best opportunity and maximise maybe the number of interviews and that we put forward for you. And I will also add that with our job search and placement service, there is no charge for that service. So that's obviously good to know. And our goal really is ultimately is to get you here within the time frame that you want to be here, so as quickly and efficiently as possible. And we want you to be in a job that matches your skills, where you can be happy and be successful, and also be in a location that is where you want to be too. So look, we want to hear from you. If you haven't already, please do register on our website, working in nzhealth.co.nz. We're just posting up the URL now for the registration page on the site. You can tell us a little bit more about you, then we will be able to keep you up to date with the latest news and jobs. If you've got a current CV, then please do go to our jobs page. So that is also being posted right now, the URL. So please feel free to click on that and apply as you want to on the page. So that sort of wraps up the healthcare industry and job market overview. Now what I will do is I will pass you over to Paul, who is in the UK, so same as you guys, he's in the evening, probably had his dinner.
Yeah, I have. Hey, Joe, how are you?
So I'll pass you over to Paul. Now, Paul is going to talk about, I'll just bring this up for you. He's going to be talking about planning your journey to New Zealand. So over to you, Paul. Thanks very much.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers, Joe. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Great to see you on here. I've been typing away and trying to answer a few questions there whilst you've all been typing in, and Joe and Nazim obviously can be doing that as well while I'm talking. So what I wanted to really touch on is how do you do this? You know, I'm sure most of you know that, you know, you've done a bit of research into New Zealand and it looks like a great place. And as Joe just said, it is. I lived in New Zealand for 17 years, recently returned to the UK. Can't wait to get back to New Zealand as soon as I can. I'm just over in the UK at the moment, but we'll be heading back at some point in the future. If you're looking for that real work-life balance, then New Zealand offers, you know, everything that you're looking for, as well as, you know, decent weather and a laid-back lifestyle. And if I was to sum up what that lifestyle is in 2 words, it's easier. It's easier than most other countries because there's less people, the weather's good, it's laid back, there's beautiful things to see and do. And, you know, in 17 years, I barely scratched the surface really of what is an amazing country and have no regrets at all. So let's crack into how do you do this? So there's basically 4 stages that we really focus on as a team, helping you make the move. And this is where we're very, very different to most traditional immigration companies who only focus on one thing, which is getting you a visa, and most recruitment companies who only focus on one thing, which is getting you a job. And the issue with that is if you're only focused on those one things, which are very, very important, the job and the visa, then you're missing some key points that can actually make it all fall apart. And so what we do as a team is take you through every single stage of the move. And that's really important. Now, the 4 stages that we take you through, the first stage is preparation. Really important, getting ready for the move. I've seen a lot of you asking questions on here, you know, where should we live and what about cities and everything else. The best way to get that information is from people like me and Joe and Nazim, people who've, you know, live in New Zealand or have moved to New Zealand and spent time in New Zealand, because we know it well. And the reason preparation is so important is it's almost impossible for an employer to engage with you or take you seriously unless they know that you are fully prepared, everything's in place, ready to go. Doesn't necessarily mean you're hopping on a plane tomorrow. It takes time, and we can work around your timeframes, whether you're looking at moving in 3 months time, 6 months time, 9 months, 12 months, whatever it might be, we can work around the time frame. But you've got to start getting ready now. As Joe said earlier, don't wait on borders opening and things like that to start doing this. Start doing this now. The borders will open. We've got vaccines coming in. We don't know when. It's up to the government, but it's, you know, potentially going to be sooner than later now. Fingers crossed. And you need to be ready. And you need to be able to prove that you're prepared. And this is the big issue that most people have if they're trying to move on their own. What you will do is you will fire off CVs to New Zealand, and it's the worst thing you can do. If you're just sitting there at home firing off CVs to jobs that you see advertised online, it's the first biggest mistake that you can make, because your CV tells the employer that you can do the job, but it doesn't tell them what they need to know, which is actually that you're fully prepared, you're ready to go, everything's in place. All they need to do is offer you a job. And if they offer you a job, everything will run as quickly and smoothly as possible. That's the bit that's missing. Now, you could tell an employer that you're fully prepared and ready to move. They don't even know what that means. And it's not answering the questions. But if you're using a team of people like ourselves, then we are putting you forward to employers as somebody who is fully prepared, ready to move, has everything in place. And what that does, it's really, really important. It minimizes the risk for the employer. And that risk is the reason a lot of employers don't engage with people when they just fire off CVs. It's too risky. So what we're doing is we're minimizing your risks and we're maximizing your opportunities. And that is why preparation is so important. And most people confuse preparation with research. They think because they've read about New Zealand, they're ready to move to New Zealand. Yeah, the reality is you're not. You're not ready to move to New Zealand unless you've got documents in place, unless you know what's happening, unless you know what costs are involved, unless you've got the right budget. You don't want to make those mistakes. And I know because I made them when I moved to New Zealand. Don't move to New Zealand like I did. Learn from my mistakes. The second stage, Joe's already covered this, is getting the job. So you got prepared, you now need to get the job. As health professionals, we've got the team in New Zealand, which Joe obviously heads up, and yeah, health professionals, if you basically are eligible, having registration in place is really, really important. You know, and that's basically the first thing. If someone's saying to us, what's the first thing I should do? If you need occupational registration, like a nurse, like a doctor, most people in health need registration. If you need it, you need to be working on getting it, because you can't work without it. You can't get the visa without it either. So you have to be going through that process as well if you haven't. But having the recruitment team that can also go to an employer and say, here's this person, they're fully prepared and ready to move, and we're handling the visas, again, takes away more risk for the employer, because the employer will have confidence that the visa will actually be issued because you've got licensed immigration advisors assisting you. And it's a key difference. So that's employment support and getting the job offer. What we also do, which one of the guys just here touched on, Ross. So Ross is already working with me. Basically, you know, the partner. Some of you will be as a family, a couple, and one of you may be a health professional and the other person might not be. We can also look at helping the other person. Yes, the health professional will be the main applicant and Joe will focus on that, but through our other resources, we can also look at helping the partner as well. So it's actually about the family and the kids. Third stage of the move is visas. Nazim's going to touch on this, so I'm not going to go into it into great detail. All I will say is getting a visa is not as simple as filling out an application form. Anybody can download a form and answer questions and fill out a form. It's the information that goes with that form to back up those answers and the format that it's submitted in, which is essential. Now, if you think that you know every single part of immigration policy and you're quite confident that you can read thousands of pages and that and do all that, then great, you know, go for it. But immigration policy is constantly changing. We've seen so many changes over the last few months with COVID and everything else. The Labour Party's just got back into power. They've just got a new cabinet in place. We're now looking at border restrictions easing in the future. There's going to be more changes to come. We know that. Luckily, as licensed advisors, we do get, you know, sometimes a little bit of an advance notice, or at least an indication of what's coming down the line. So having licensed immigration advisors is crucial, but not only from your perspective. The employer often needs help. Most employers haven't got a clue about immigration or how it works or what you need to be doing to get a visa, and especially with this new exemption to border restrictions. So, you know, they're my key takeaway points for having licensed advisors assisting you. Is it's not what you know, it's what you don't know that trips you up, and that's where that can really help. And then the final stage of the move that we help you with is relocation. So once you've got your job and your visas are in and they've been issued and you're ready to hop on that plane, having help and support for as long as you need it until you don't need it anymore. Now, some people, they don't email me at all once they've moved. They'll just get on, they'll settle in and they're fine. And I don't hear from them. That's great. Other people will be in touch with me for months and months and months. I've got one guy from America. He still chats to me via email, I think 18 months after I moved him. He's fine, he's settled, he's in Christchurch, he's loving it, but he keeps in touch and he'll ask me questions about things, and that's great, you know. So it's not something that you have to use, but knowing that you've got the help and support around you as a family or as a couple or even as a single person moving over, because that can be quite scary as well, again, just takes away those risks and means you've got that background and support. So we're very different. We take you from calls and webinars like this to fully settled in New Zealand by taking you through preparation, employment support, visa application, relocation support. And that's the best way to do it. And we are one of the few companies out there who offer that complete 360-degree service. So I think I've covered everything actually there. If anyone wants to book a free consultation with me, then I've been typing this link. Click on it when you get a chance. It'll take you to a form. You'll fill out a few basic questions to give me some information about you. You can upload your CVs because I'll need those as well. And then what we'll do, you select the time and date that suits you, and we'll have a chat. It usually takes around 30 to 45 minutes. You can have as many questions as you want. I will answer those questions, but by the end of that call, you should be very clear. These are my options. This is how it works. These are the steps I need to take. These are the budget that I'm looking at. This is the time frame. And then you have all the information you need to decide how you move forward. So just do that. You know, this is just for you guys being on this webinar. I'd love to talk to all of you on here. I'm saying that without even knowing how many people are on here. But definitely, you've got nothing to lose, everything to gain. It's not a sales call. It's not a pressure call. Some of you on here have already had that call with me, and you know they can vouch for that. But definitely, first step, you've done the webinar. Next step, get the call with me, then you'll have even more clarity on how to move forward. So that's me done. I'll be typing questions, answers to questions in the chat room. I'm going to hand over to Nazim now, who's head of working in immigration services. And Nazim's going to go more into the details around visas and the key information really that you need to know about visas. So Nazim, are you all good? Are you all ready?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi everyone, morena. As introduced by Paul and Joe earlier, my name's Nassim. I'm the head of immigration services here at Working In. I've been here for almost 10 years, so quite a long tenure, providing immigration assistance to people who've been coming down to New Zealand. I've been working with Paul for a very, very long part of that time, making sure that it's as smooth and as easy a move as possible, and making sure that everything that has been considered. I'm just going to really briefly talk about visas in general and what the current sort of state of visas is. As advised by both Paul and Joe, things are changing, and that's one of the key things that I think is a benefit of working with a licensed advisor who's part of a company who, you know, last year alone, we processed 2,000 visa applications and helped almost as many employers. We're that bridge between yourself, the employer, and everyone else, just to make sure that everything's working the way that it should. Things are always changing, and so it's really important that you have the most up-to-date information to make sure that there's nothing that's going to trip you up along the way. So just in general, obviously we know borders are closed for almost everyone, except for you lucky people who are on this webinar this morning. You're part of a very small cohort that's eligible for exemptions. I did see a question posted by, I think, Sarah, about the critical health workers and the 31 December date. That is the current date. They haven't announced a further extension, but there is nothing to suggest that it won't be extended again. The government's just doing it 6 months at a time to make it look like they're in control of things, as all governments do. So I wouldn't be worried about that at all. Obviously, the best way to come to New Zealand as of today, and I say as of today, is because the instructions are currently ever changing and moving. So it might be a little bit different in a week's time. But as of today, you're able to come to New Zealand as a critical health worker under the exemptions, and your family can join you. And then once you're here, or at least physically onshore in New Zealand, then we would go through the process of a regular visa application. So what's important to know is that what you thought you might have known previously, that's all completely changed. And the process has got like 3 or 4 additional steps in it now. They're not necessarily hard because we'll be here to guide you through that process, but it's just good to be aware of what additional things are needed. So the way that it's currently working is that the first thing we do is, one, make sure that you've got a job offer that meets immigration policy and New Zealand employment law. So we work with the employer and Joe and the recruitment team to make sure that the offer has the exact wording that we need to be able to, one, submit it under the current border exemptions, and two, that it'll meet further immigration policy when we apply for your subsequent visas. So sometimes there's a little bit of backwards and forwards at the back end here while we make sure that it's got just the right wording to fit the needs of what we're trying to achieve. So because we've got the relationships with the employers, that's quite easy to manage. That's not really a problem. So what we would then do is submit the expression of interest, or EOI, under the critical health worker. Once that's submitted, we will then get the invitation to apply. So the invitation to apply is currently a visitor visa for yourself and your family, but you as the primary applicant will be given work rights. So it's called an exception to instructions, because normally you can't work on a visitor visa, but you will be given work rights. And what's really, really important as part of that preparation that Paul was referring to is that we have everything else already prepared and ready to go so that we can submit your work visa once you're physically onshore. So we'll submit the EOI, get our ITA, submit the ITA, get your visas, help you book your managed isolation and get your voucher, arrive in New Zealand, and once we know that you're past customs and you're safely tucked away in wherever you might be based, we submit the work visa under the relevant instructions so that you can get your normal work visa for the 3 years or 30 months, depending on your specific employer or the policy we're applying under, and that all of your family can also then get the visas that they would normally be entitled to. So your partner would get an open work visa and your children would get student or visitor visas. Now, the reason why it's important to have these additional visas ready and submitted and approved is that, number one, they'll be issued for more than 2 years, giving you all access to publicly funded health, which means you don't have to worry about, you know, it costing several $100s just to go to the doctor or anything. And secondly, your children will be able to attend school as domestic students. So although children can go to school on a visitor visa, they're limited to how much they can go to school on a visitor visa and in a school year. So this just ensures that that's not going to be an issue, and you can get on with settling in and, you know, going to work and doing everything else that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. The other important thing is the reason why we need to have these further visas prepared and submitted is so that you're not finding yourself in New Zealand with a visa that's expiring. The visitor visas that are issued under the border exemption can be issued for up to 12 months for health workers, critical health workers, but they're currently only being issued for 6. So you think, oh, 6 months sounds like a really long time. But once you're here and you've sort of got life going and getting settled and all the rest of it, it can go by really, really quickly. So that's why it's also important to have the next step of the process all prepared and ready to go as well. I appreciate I just downloaded a whole lot of information really, really quickly, and I'm really sorry about that. But what we do is, as part of the process, after you've spoken to Paul and you've determined that you do qualify and you do want to proceed, part of our process is to sit down with each of you once you're a client to explain, based on your circumstances, these are the things that we're going to have to prepare and be mindful of because of your family circumstances. And that help will also include, you know, whether your children do qualify for student visas or whether it'll be a visitor visa and all the rest of it as well. The only other thing that I thought would be really, really important to mention is that the amount of time that people think that it takes to get prepared is always longer than they anticipate. Things like COVID will throw things out of whack. Life gets in the way, you know, family commitments, schooling, all of these things will always mean that it's harder to you know, move things as quickly as you thought. So it's always best to get started sooner rather than later. The other thing is that with the constant changes that are happening and the fact that we don't necessarily know what's around the corner, it's important to be working with someone who's got their finger on the pulse and is able to manage that for you. I noticed that we've got, I thought I saw Jess online earlier. She's actually a client, hello, that we're working with actually because of her partner. We were working with that employer, they've been offered a job, but then the borders were closed. So we found an alternative pathway and a potential exemption pathway for them to come to New Zealand now that the borders are closed. So part of licensed advisors' roles is to constantly assess and reassess and see what other options you're eligible for and what else you can possibly do. So part of that conversation is always going to be, you know, what are you doing? What is your partner doing? What else could you be doing to be prepared? But the one thing that always seems to be the first hurdle for those in the medical profession is New Zealand registration. And I cannot, you know, say enough how important it is to get this process underway. It does take time. Obviously, people are always, like I said, they've got life and work and everything else in the way, and you're trying to deal with third parties to get documents and the rest. So what I will do is I'll hand you back over to Jo now, who's going to go through the New Zealand registration process and why it is so important that you do get this started now, because without it, we can't actually apply for the visa. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much, Nassim. Yes, as Nassim said, we were going to be talking about the New Zealand registration process next. Also, just a thank you to Paul as well. Obviously, Paul talked to you about the 4 important steps, and you know, I urge you to book a consultation with Paul, just to get the ball rolling there. And he's got so much knowledge and information that he can share with you, and really give you all those initial pointers and get you started on that process. And it's never too early to get started. You know, even if you're not moving here for 2 years, just get started. You know, it's good to have some time up your sleeve. Also, again, just thank you, Nassim. You know, there's a lot of information to take on board. Some of that is quite technical, and if you're not a licensed advisor yourself, it can all seem a little bit overwhelming. But you know, please don't worry about that. You know, it is a bit more challenging at the moment in terms of us processing visas for you, because there are those additional steps in the process. But we are experienced in managing that, and yeah, just feel safe in the knowledge that we've got all that up-to-date information. As Nassim said, you know, we've got our finger on the pulse, and so we are best placed to be able to help you in terms of which way to navigate the pathway to get your work visa and eventually get residency as well. So thank you again. So yes, on to the New Zealand registration process. Now, all of us have touched on this so far, and what I will say is that I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to get started with your registration. As Nassim and Paul said, you can't get a job, you can't get your visa without having registration. There's a number of different medical bodies in New Zealand according to what your different profession is in healthcare. And so what we'll do, and we follow up from this webinar, is we'll actually send you a PDF of all these different bodies in New Zealand, so you can see which one is relevant for you. Now, they all do, pretty much all of them have information on their websites for overseas trained professionals that are looking at putting an application in. But please know that we're here to help and guide you. So if you do have any questions on that, then feel free to let us know. You know, doing your registration it really shows to an employer that you are actually motivated to move. And so as the recruitment team representing you to an employer, if you have your registration, then you will be prioritised in that process. As we know, at the moment, it depends on what body that you apply for, which medical body, but it can take 2-3 months, even more, to process your registration application. So that again is going to add on to that time frame of you planning your move. In addition to that, the work involved in gathering your documents to put together all the information you need to apply for your registration can also take some time, as Naseem mentioned as well. And what I'm finding at the moment is I'm getting lots of feedback from candidates that it's more challenging at the moment gathering documents, obviously because of COVID, universities being closed, people working remotely, you know, people dealing with COVID, not being able to give relevant references, etc. So anything you can do to get that ball rolling, I would suggest you start doing, because it is taking longer at the moment. And yeah, so yeah, please get started. But as I say, we'll send you the information at the end of the webinar. The next thing that we're going to just cover is we're just going to talk a little bit about a little bit more about our expertise. I've talked to you about healthcare in New Zealand and the job opportunities. We've talked to you about planning your journey. We've talked to you about visas. But I just want to really capture for you the services that we provide and how important that kind of triage of services really are between Naseem's team with the visa and Paul with his immigration employment consulting and relocation, and also what we do as part of the recruitment team. As I said in the intro, we've been helping people move to New Zealand now for 20 years, so we're very well versed in that. You know, we really pride ourselves on our service. You know, we're very hands-on, and you should find that we're very approachable and very friendly team, but we're also very professional in what we do, and you know, we've got a lot of knowledge between us. What we're providing you really is an end-to-end service from when you start your journey to thinking about moving to New Zealand, right through to being landed in New Zealand and being settled. So just to summarise that again, in terms of what we've been talking about today is, you know, it all starts off with some general employment and immigration advice with Paul, where you can book a consultation with him, which is free. We give you registration support. Our recruitment team will get you job ready, do a job search and secure you a job. We give you full visa assistance, including the border exemption, and then that's followed up with the relocation guidance. So it's the full package that we do, and you know, our goal and what we work by, our ethos, is getting you here as quickly as possible, as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. So we're here to help you. So not much longer to go on the webinar, just a few final things. What I wanted to share with you next is where to from here. We've talked about a lot, and I just want to be able to give you a really simple, some simple tips on what to do next. And as I speak, one of my colleagues will be posting up the URLs in the chat room for each of these things. So firstly, what we recommend you do is you can register with Working New Zealand Health, and by registering with us, we will then be able to keep you up to date with all the latest jobs and news. get your CV up to date if it's not already. We can send you some information on the best format for your CV as well. So we've got a guideline on that as well. If you have your CV up to date already, you know, doesn't matter where you are in the process, feel free to go to our jobs page. So the URL is also being posted up there now, and apply for a role and upload your CV. And we'll review that and come back to you. If your job isn't listed on the page, don't worry. And that doesn't mean to say there aren't jobs for you. We do try and keep those as up to date as possible. But you can also just send us an email with your CV. So the email address should be popping up now in the chat room, nzhealth@workingin.com. It seems like everything's working well. The other thing that I've said, and we've all said, and I'll say again, is to get started on your registration. We will send you a PDF with all the different medical bodies in New Zealand, just to guide you on that initially. And finally, as Paul has said, that he is offers a consultation for free. So we encourage you to book in for a consultation with Paul, and he'll get you started and help you get prepared. So in the next few days, you will see that you'll receive an email from us with all these links that we've been posting, PDF, a recording of the webinar, but please feel free to contact us with any questions. Take a look around our website, workinginNZhealth.co.nz, and we've got some FAQs on the website as well. And we will also, sorry if we've not answered your question as well, we'll also look at some of those questions in the chat room, and we'll be posting some responses on those as well. So that sort of wraps things up from my end. Paul and Nassim, is there anything you wanted to add before I sign off?
No, just backing up what you said, Joe, really. It's been great to see people online, and as you say, we've been doing this a long time, and this is a great way of doing it, you know, just getting in at the early stages to get people on track and get them organised and get them ready, and that's what we're all here to do. So yeah, I see a few people have booked in calls, which is awesome, and I look forward to talking to them.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing. I tried to go through the chat to see if there was any specific questions about visas that I hadn't touched on. Hopefully I did, didn't miss any. But yeah, the sooner that you can book a time to have a chat with Paul and get things started, the better. It'll just mean that the rest of the process is as smooth as possible. And we can see you down here in Aotearoa. Brilliant.
So, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks again to Paul and Nassim. We really look forward to helping you on your journey to New Zealand. Thanks so much. Bye.